Hey everybody, welcome to episode 67 of the HooperCast. This episode is just me and Dustin talking about some shows we've been keeping up with. So I'll put the time code in so you can skip to the shows that you are interested in. So yeah, anyway, just enjoy the episode and stay tuned for future ones. Thanks. Hey everybody, welcome to the HooperCast. I'm Hooper, and who's this on the other end of Skype?
This would be Dustin.
Oh my god, it's Dustin. I didn't expect that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. Okay, so we've got some TV to talk about today. Dustin, you've got a couple of shows you had something to say about. I've got some stuff too, but let's start with you.
Start with me, okay.
Because I'm polite.
Okay. Just to warn you, I have a delicious pizza in front of me right now. So any smacking or overall chewing noises are attributed to my lunchtime activities.
It's bad radio, Dustin.
I'm sorry.
I
apologize.
Throat-warming coffee here, too, so don't mind my
sipping. That was loud. I will give you that.
I'm going to have to see how that sounds later.
I heard that.
I held it right up to the mic.
You did. I just thought I'd talk about two shows that I've been watching recently. We've got The Flash and Arrow. The Flash started in 2014, the fall season, and Arrow started, I believe, in 2012. And I had always had no interest in Arrow because I had suffered through Smallville for 10 years. And I say suffered through it. Well, okay. The first few years were okay, and then beyond that it was really garbage, and I didn't actually watch the last two seasons. So 8 years. 10 years total. I didn't watch the whole thing. Anyway, Point is, I had suffered through that, so I was just like, okay, I don't want to deal with another CW show where things are super Abercrombie models doing crazy things. Flash forward to The Flash. The Flash is a character that I really love, and so, of course, when it is announced, I'm excited for it, even though it's a CW show, even though I know it's going to be kind of garbage. I decide, okay, I'm going to watch this one, I'm going to give it a try. So it comes out, and a week or two later, I check it out on Hulu. And I was actually really very surprised. And I think maybe we talked about it a little bit on the HooperCast before. But The Flash is actually a really, really interesting show. It has some solid characters that are intriguing and likable and funny. And overall, I felt like it captured the spirit of the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, which is to say that it wasn't a dark, brooding kind of movie. It was... The Flash is a funny, likable, charming, young character. So it had that Spider-Man sensibility to it. And then when you think back to the first Sam Raimi movie, there's a little bit of narration that opened and closed the movie. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man kind of thing. The Flash borrows a little bit of that, has some opening and closing narration from Barry Allen. And so overall, it just kind of reminded me a little bit of Spider-Man, and so I enjoyed it for that reason. Creatively, I mean, it is still a CW show, so sometimes it looks a little cheesy, sometimes it looks a little, television, if that makes any sense. By and large, I mean, these actors are actually really well suited for the roles that they're playing. Grant Gustin plays Barry Allen, and I've never seen him in anything, and honestly, if he was a newcomer, it wouldn't surprise me, but he really is the best thing about the show. He is funny and has a good comedic sensibility about him. And on top of that, also can display that heroism that the Flash is growing into over the first half of this first season, which is all that is aired up to the recording of this episode. It's just a fun show, and Grant Gustin can play this character well. for all of his ups and downs. And he does have a lot because I'll just recap a little bit of the premise here. The premise is that when Barry Allen was a young boy, I believe 8, 10 years old, something like that, because things always happen to superheroes when they're 8 or 10, his mother was killed in his home. Barry wakes up, goes downstairs, and there's a ball of lightning around his mother. It looks vaguely humanoid, this lightning. And Barry tries to reach out for his mother, but in an instant is out on the street. And when he comes back into his home, his mother has been stabbed and is dead. And the police arrive and arrest his father for the murder. And his father is played by the TV's original Flash, John Wesley Shipp, from the 90s show, which is a really, really cool nod. And he's not the only cast member from the original show that is in this one. In fact, Mark Hamill will make an appearance in the second half of this season as the Trickster, which was a role he played in the original 90s Flash series.
Wow.
So they're going all out with this. So Barry grows up, becomes a CSI, inspired, of course, by his mother and by the belief that it wasn't his father who killed her, but rather this ball of lightning. So he begins to study the paranormal, begins to study, strange things that have been happening. And as chance would have it, a local science laboratory, Star Labs, is developing a particle accelerator. And when it goes haywire, the shockwave from that event, coupled with a lightning strike, gives Barry super speed. So now Barry is a ball of lightning and begins to kind of think that maybe this ball of lightning that killed his mother was another speedster like himself. So, of course, now he's very motivated to find who the speedster is and whatnot. And Barry's a good, kind-hearted guy, and so he begins to use his powers for good. They don't really waste any time with this, I could use it for personal gain or I could use it for anything other than, it's the right thing to do. So that's kind of a welcome change from typical superhero kind of things. And so anyway, the point is the Flash begins to patrol Central City, and long story short, it feels a little bit like Smallville did in its early seasons. Smallville had what they called the Freak of the Week. It was a random person with random superpowers that Clark would have to go up against, and this is a little bit of the same, but the difference here is that the villains that Barry is fighting, they're actually villains from the comics. Like I said, the Trickster. We've already seen Captain Cold, played by Prison Break's Wentworth Miller. We've also seen a version of the Weather Wizard. We've actually seen Gorilla Grodd, believe it or not.
Yeah.
We've seen Plastique. We've seen General Eiling, and many more. And these villains are all... we've actually also been hinted at... they've hinted at Heatwave. So there's a lot of big things in the works for this show, and a lot of classic Flash villains that will be introduced shortly if they haven't already been. And it's just a really solid show, and to me, it may be the best superhero show live action that I've ever seen. This one really embraces the superhero, the metahuman aspect of superpowers in a weekly television format, whereas Arrow, is more grounded in reality. But you don't really have a lot to compare it to live action wise. There's like Lois and Clark and the 60s Adam West series. There's not a lot of stuff to compare it to, so it's not really all that difficult. But it may be the best true superhero show. Even if I think Arrow may be the better show, The Flash is the better superhero show, and maybe the best superhero show that has ever been on television. And I'll also say this too. I think we're at a really good place where on television we can do a lot of cool visual effects that we couldn't have done 5 years ago even.
Yeah.
And do you remember towards the end of Lost, Hooper, there was a shot, it was in the final season, where you see the island underwater? That shot has always stuck out to me as just being incredibly fake looking.
Horrible.
Yeah, it's like this goofy shot, it just pulls back and you see the island underwater. There's these goofy looking CGI sharks that swim by and schools of fish, and it just looks really
it's bad,
janky. It is bad. But, understandable. I don't fault the show for that. I mean, it was understandable at that time. But I think we're at a really good point now, and the Flash really kind of keeps pushing the envelope as far as his powers go, because you've got to use visual effects just to, on him, at the very minimum. But then when you add in other characters like Captain Cold, then you've got a whole nother layer of things you've got to do. Something that sticks out recently is there was an episode where a bomb goes off in the harbor. There's a shot of Barry running away from this tidal wave that, sure, it's still television, but it looks really good, and it doesn't have the laughability that it would have had 5 years ago on television. And so I don't know if they're just receiving a larger budget for their visual effects, or if visual effects have just been pushed that far. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, and like I said, the show's got some really great guest stars and some really great adult actors, which make it feel more mature than a typical CW show where everything is 20-something-year-old attractive people. You've got some more mature faces. Clancy Brown was in an episode.
Some uglier people.
Yeah, I mean, to put it, yes. Let me put it this way: some real-looking people, some people that didn't look like they just got done like
modeling.
Yeah, like they didn't just come from a Hollister shoot. And so for that reason, I think the show's a lot more mature than it has any right to be, being on the CW. So I'm enjoying The Flash a lot. I believe only episode like 5 through 9 is available on Hulu anymore. I don't know why they do that, but if you have the ability to check out the first 4 somewhere else, I don't know where you would. I don't know. I guess you could buy them on iTunes, or Amazon Prime maybe. But if you have the ability to check the show out, I highly recommend it, especially if you are a fan of the character or just of superhero stuff in general. Because, like I said, it's a really fun exploration of superheroes on television. And I will warn you, I've talked a lot about the good. There is some bad. Some of the actors are not quite up to snuff, and you'll notice it when they get along someone who is really good. When they're by themselves or with another actor who's not all that great, you can kind of buy it a little bit. But you put them against somebody who's tearing up, and then you realize, oh, wait, why are they not tearing up? Oh, because they can't, because they're not that level of actor. But I will say that towards the end of the season, it seems like everybody's settling in a little bit. So maybe that was just a little bit of nerves or a little bit of trying to figure out the characters. So hopefully that's something that'll get better with time. But overall, it's a very good show, and it does fall a little bit formulaic at times. But you know what? I can't fault you for formula, I guess. At least you have one. So anyway, that's The Flash.
Speaking of the CW, you have another show.
I do. I have Arrow. I believe it's the 8th episode of each show of their current season, The Flash and Arrow. There's a crossover.
Oh.
So it's a 2-parter. You have to watch one part on The Flash and one part on Arrow. So because I knew that was coming up, I decided I better go ahead and give Arrow a shot, even though I had tried to watch the pilot twice already and had never made it through the pilot. So I watched the pilot, finally got through it, and realized at the end that some of the things that I'd had a problem with at the beginning were solved by the end. And if I had just kept watching, I probably would have been okay. Arrow really surprised me too. It's another one of those shows that it seems they're going to sell it on the abs of Stephen Amell, because they do. I mean, any picture you see from Arrow, it's usually him with his shirt off. So I thought, oh, great, okay, it's a Hollister ad, basically. The whole show is, but it really isn't. They've got some adult actors in there that, like I said for Arrow or for Flash, it sort of lends credence and matures the show a little bit. What Arrow has going for it is a couple of things. First of all, interesting characters with interesting secrets. It's not easy to do interesting secrets. It's very easy to do secrets. Oh, here's a character with a secret, but it's not easy to do an interesting one. It has a tone that it strikes that I think was really, really cool. Arrow is about a spoiled rich kid named Oliver Queen. Oliver Queen is just a jerk and playboy, all that kind of stuff, right? And he goes on a cruise with his father and his girlfriend's sister, because he's a jerk. And the ship that they're on, it's their own ship. It's not like a cruise liner. It's their own ship. They're billionaires. I don't know what happens, but it hits something or something, and anyway, the ship goes down. You sort of see from there that Oliver Queen washes up on shore of this deserted Chinese island. And over the course of the season, the first season, we flash back from the island to the mainland. And so what happens is, after 5 years on this island, he comes home. He's finally rescued from the island, and he comes home to Starling City, reunites with his mother and his sister. His father died in the crash, the boat sinking, whatever. So his mother's been remarried, and so there's some changes that have happened that he's got to get used to. Oliver comes back a very different man than the man that was on the boat. He is focused and quiet, really, really kind of burdened by something. And what it turns out that is his father was involved in a lot of bad dealings, a lot of gangster activity, a lot of bad stuff in Starling City. And so to atone for his father's sins, his father had given him a list of all the names of people that were poisoning the city. Oliver takes this list and begins to hunt down the rich and the powerful in Starling City. Sort of a Robin Hood story. He's seeking out the rich and the corrupt in the city, and, as the Arrow, confronting them and causing them to either go to jail or change their ways. And we keep flashing back to seeing his time on the island and how it has changed him, from the spoiled rich kid to the super focused, incredibly fit and talented, man that he is now. And so that trend continues into the third season. We're flashing back and forth. The show builds a very natural way. It's not a Freak of the Week show. It's not really a Mystery of the Week show like, say, Sherlock is, or any CSI kind of thing, although there is an element of that. But there definitely is an overarching story that happens each season. So the first season, there's a threat to his city that the Arrow begins to have to solve. The second season, one of the things that he encountered on the island comes back to haunt him. And in the third season, he's haunted by some time that he spent off the island during those initial 5 years, because he wasn't on the island the entire 5 years. So there's a lot of interesting secrets happening, and we're flashing back and forth. And anyway, I've spent a good amount of time, I feel like, recapping, but nevertheless, it's a really cool show. What I mean by the tone of it, it's very inspired by The Raid, it seems. It's brutal, it's real, and it's intense. What Oliver Queen does is not just shoot bows and arrows, but also, throat punches and, gut stabbings, and it's intense. Now, there's a progression that the show has seen, which it remains to be seen whether this is good or bad. That now that it crosses over with The Flash, which is a very supernatural, superpower-y show, the Arrow has had to change the world that it exists in, from a very realistic Batman Begins type of world to a superpowered Justice League type of world. And I feel like it's doing a pretty good job so far. We're about halfway through the third season now, and really it was this third season where that change was going to happen. So, it remains to be seen how it'll, end up by the end of this. But where we are right now, Oliver is taking on the League of Assassins and Ra's al Ghul. So we're taking on a lot of really cool, familiar DC characters and twisting them in very cool, interesting ways. Long story short, it's a really cool show. It's something that I think is really fun, if not incredibly smart. It is fun. Has a story worth telling, and its actors do a fine job for the most part. Again, like on Flash, there are people that you kind of have to suffer through, and there are people who are just, Hollister models. In fact, I think one of them was an Abercrombie model for a very long time.
Shocking.
I know. It's just mind-blowing that would happen on a CW show.
Absolutely shocking.
But But Brandon Routh is on the show now. That lends a little bit of credence to it. And yeah, it's just interesting. And they've brought in a lot of superheroes and a lot of villains and a lot of DC Comics locations and stuff that has never seen the light of day in terms of live action material before. And so for that reason alone, the fanboy in me likes it. But the filmmaker in me also enjoys the tone that it strikes and the way that the story unfolds. It's not uncommon in a post-Lost TV environment to see, the flashback, right? Flashbacks happen in every show all the time. But Lost was really the only one, to me, up until Arrow, to do it interestingly. Because on Lost you have what's going on the island, and then we'll flashback to something that happened on the mainland that sort of is the same thematically or, is just similar in some way to what's happening on the island. And the same sort of thing is happening on Arrow. So they're definitely taking a few cues from Lost in a good way, not in a, oh great, they're going to start doing stupid things that are never going to be answered kind of way. There again, it's a really fun show, and apart from a few bad actors and apart from a few strange storylines, I think it's really worth your time. And like I said, it's on Netflix, so you may have to suffer through the first episode, especially if you know anything about the Green Arrow mythology. You'll start being like, oh, great, they're changing that, they're changing this, they're changing all these stupid things for no apparent reason. But it does make sense later, so stick with it. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. The Flash and the Arrow are both worth your time. Really, if you watch one and enjoy it, I would recommend watching the other because they're in the same kind of league in terms of storytelling. So if you enjoy one, you'll probably enjoy the other. So give them both a shot. I will say this too. It's very interesting to me that there's a Flash show and a Green Arrow show, and there's a show called Gotham. And of the three, the one that I'm not watching is Gotham.
Yeah.
The one that has the most to do with the character that I love the most, I don't watch.
Well, I mean, to watch a show that that's associated with Batman, and then the whole time you're like, this would just be so much better if Batman was in it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's I did watch the first 2 episodes, but it's just unbearable. Like I cannot even, and I don't think it's one of those things like with Arrow, like if I gave it another shot, maybe I would like it. I think it's just I'm never going to like Gotham. It just doesn't even make any sense to me conceptually. In a TV landscape where there's superheroes beating up supervillains, why would I want to watch a show about a city and about a cop who doesn't beat up supervillains because he can't because they don't exist yet? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense to me why I would watch that show.
Yeah.
When I could watch the Flash run circles around Captain Cold, or I could watch Jim Gordon take down Carmine Falcone. Oh wait, not take him down because he can't win in the end because Batman has to be here. I'll also say this too, one last thing. Greg Berlanti is the executive producer of both Flash and Arrow, and he's also pitched a new show which will be on CBS, not on CW, called Supergirl. And if it goes to series, it will exist in the same universe as these 2 shows, so we could have a cross-network crossover between Supergirl, Flash, and Arrow. And I find that concept intriguing. And I think TNT is also, they're working on a pilot for TNT called Teen Titans, which would star Dick Grayson as Nightwing, as the leader of the Teen Titans. And the thought, even though Greg Berlanti is not involved, is that DC wants that show to also be able to cross over with Flash and Arrow. So I don't know how it will all work out. It doesn't sound like it will, because on Teen Titans you would think Kid Flash would be there, and if Kid Flash is there, you'd be like, well, why is Kid Flash not on Flash? So anyway, I don't know if any of that will work out, but Supergirl is in the process of being made, and it's by Greg Berlanti, so that will be the third in this universe that we'll see. So, but probably not the last.
So I decided that since Justified is currently entering its final season on FX, I thought, hey, this is a great time to start the show in general. I hopped onto Amazon, and I've been watching Justified. and I've finished the whole first season, and I thought it was worth talking about. This is a neo-western starring Timothy Oliphant as a U.S. Marshal, and it takes place in a town called Harlan, Kentucky. And Dustin, I'm going to go ahead and recommend this show to you because I think it's right up your alley. This is a show about, he's a U.S. Marshal, and in the pilot, he kills a guy. And everyone's sort of kind of doubting that it wasn't a clean shoot or something. I don't know. But so at the time, he's in Miami, and so they send him back to his hometown or whatever to work for the Marshal Service there. And it's an interesting little show. The first season sort of takes on, especially in the first half, it takes on more of a crime of the week kind of thing. But so well done. Like, first of all, the setting just being in Kentucky makes it different from any other like weekly show. So what differentiates it is the setting. The dialogue is very good, and whoever the antagonist is that week, or whoever's hostage holding the whatever, all the dialogue's written smartly. Every like little trick and stupid trope that you see in like Law and Order, or I don't know, some other show, like doesn't happen because everyone's too smart for that kind of thing. It's a funny show, and the cinematography is very impressive. Like, you would rewatch the show because the shot design is so good that you want to watch it. Like, so every interaction is, like when we sit down, we criticize things and we go, well, why wouldn't he just do this? Those kinds of things happen in this show, or they don't because everyone's already thought of it, kind of thing. So it exceeds your expectations of how a scene develops or how a confrontation develops. The acting's all really good. The story's interesting. The characters are engaging. The cinematography is well done. This show also stars Walton Goggins, who I'm a big fan of, especially from The Shield, and who I think over the course of the series is kind of the main antagonist, although he's sort of just being established in this first season. But it's a very good show. I'm really looking forward to the next, I think, 3 seasons that I'm still got to get through. Anyone who's already watching the show knows what I'm talking about and is probably enjoying the final season as we speak. And I think I heard someone refer to it as the most underrated show on television. Like, because I don't hear anybody talk about Justified. I remember when it came out, this one podcast I was listening to, like, would always mention it, like, Justified. I'd be like, okay, cool, you like Justified. But he's the only one I've heard talk about it. And I'm thinking, why isn't this show in the spotlight more? It's so good. Anyway, I highly recommend Justified for just anyone who's a fan of good television.
That reminds me, my uncle actually let me borrow the first season on DVD. It was over a year ago. And I watched the first maybe 3 or 4 episodes. And I don't remember why I quit. I cannot. As you were sitting here thinking, I remembered the Miami thing, but I don't remember what it was that made me stop. And I don't know if it was just that I just stopped.
Yeah, I had the same experience. Like, I'd watched like the first 3 or 4, and for some reason I had stopped. And I'm going through watching it, like, why didn't I? And maybe it is that those first 3 are just kind of like, meh, because you're just like, oh, and but I don't know. Maybe right after that it got better. I don't remember. I just know thinking like this show is. I've been hearing great things about this, and I don't know. I just for some reason I gave it another shot, and I don't know what it is.
It actually reminds me that I still have his DVD set.
Well, you should finish the season.
I should. I remember seeing one of the more recent episodes at the television festival that SCAD puts on every year. I worked that last year, and we had a Justified night. And so they showed a couple of or maybe just one of the more recent episodes. And like you said, it looked phenomenal just in terms of cinematography. But I tried not to pay attention to the story because I thought at some point I might pick the show back up. So
right, yeah, I think it was just the shot design's very deliberate and very well done.
Sure,
and especially you need that in what's essentially like a modern day Western, And people think like maybe to like the average viewer, it's like, well, who cares about the shot design? You don't realize that like the shot design really does play into whether you like a show or not, because whether you realize it's subliminal, whether you realize it or not. A show looking good actually is part of what tells your brain you like it. If a show is not that well shot, that's going to play into you thinking like, oh, I just didn't enjoy watching it. Like, why? I don't know. I'm not really sure. Something about it.
But see, that leads me to a good sort of point with Flash and Arrow is that Flash and Arrow, it's competent, but I wouldn't say like beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, I would never say I'm going to rewatch it because it's just, you know, so gorgeous to look at.
Yeah.
So it definitely does mean something when your show is like that. And, you know, that's the way Breaking Bad was. And to some extent, you know, Lost was that way. It was a really good looking show in its heyday.
Well, that's Justified.
Well, that's good.
I also finished a show, speaking of FX and speaking of Walton Goggins, had been watching for several months The Shield. And obviously, for people who don't know, The Shield was a television show on FX from like 2002 or something. I don't know, from like 7 seasons, ended in 2008. This was a show starring Michael Chiklis as a Los Angeles strike team leader. He was corrupt, and his strike team teammates who were also kind of crooked cops in a way. And so this show was extremely important in modern day storytelling and character work because this was the show, along with The Sopranos, that showed people that like your main character didn't have to be a great person to make the show interesting. Like in fact, him being a morally conflicted character was more interesting than, you know, watching, you know, a Boy Scout do good things against bad people all the time. So this show was the other side of the coin. You know, everyone's, The Sopranos ushered it in. It was The Sopranos, but it was also The Shield. The Shield, what The Sopranos was doing with HBO was one thing, and what The Shield was able to do on cable was another. You know, and that's really the standard for most of the shows you see on cable these days. Now, I'll say the show as a whole, I don't like it as much as Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or, you know, maybe other shows I've seen. And if you haven't already watched it, maybe it's not worth, you know, it's 7 seasons long, and I have to be honest, the first 3 they're just kind of okay, but part of that might be because I don't know if they don't hold up. I'm not sure why they don't hold up. I think maybe it's just a hard show to binge watch. Like it might be hard to watch them back to back, just because, you know, they're a little slower, and I don't know. But where the show really gets good is in the 4th season. Glenn Close is a character that season. She becomes the captain. So that's when the show really picks up, and that's kind of the popular opinion about it. Like the show kind of started getting really good when she showed up, and then the season after that, Forrest Whitaker is in it. So it's a good, solid show. Enjoyed seeing it all the way through. I just think it's a little hard to just sort of marathon it.
Sure.
This was before people considered that people would be able to watch these back to back to back to back to back, you know, right, in quick succession. So that's not factored into the way they told their story, you know. So one of the things I guess that doesn't hold up is the pace, I suppose.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But a good show with compelling characters and very serious consequences and very serious situations. And so, of course, I was super into that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's The Shield. So also on FX, and also with the involvement of Kurt Sutter, I also finished Sons of Anarchy, which concluded its series run on FX this past fall. This show was starting up right around the same time that The Shield was ending. I think it premiered during this... maybe it was right after The Shield finished. And the showrunner's a guy named Kurt Sutter, who was an executive producer on The Shield. So Sons of Anarchy is about a motorcycle club, gang, I guess, who are involved in like arms dealing for the Irish mob and just kind of, low-level racketeering. They're not nearly as bad as, you know, Tony Soprano or Vic Mackey.
Sure.
The main character's his name is Jax Teller, played by Charlie Hunnam. The show's solid. I really don't have that many complaints. I don't know if I'd recommend it. I mean, let me start with the negatives, and I'll bring it back around. It's really hard for me, especially, to watch a show where the person playing the main character is from England, and he's putting on an American accent, and for 7 years, I have to continually watch him fail at doing so. For 7 years. It's just like, he's just like, the Irish are coming to get the guns. We have to get them out of here. And then, like, or whenever he had to talk faster, yell, you could just tell, like, God, he's not an American.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but they're supposed to be from, like, Oakland. You know what I mean? Like,
oh,
I can just see right through him. So,
right.
I mean, I love Charlie Hunnam. I just, that's the only thing is that really did pull me out of it. It just continually reminded me. It's also another one of those shows. Sam and I talked about this while we were watching The Expendables. It's another one of those shows where everyone growls their lines as much as possible because they're these tough biker dudes, and I've never seen so much smoking and drinking on a show. Like, just Sons of Anarchy it's one of those shows where, and it took me out of it a lot because I kept thinking, like, and maybe I'm uptight, but I think people who know me personally know I'm really not. This show is surrounded by, these bad boys with tattoos and motorcycles who are surrounded by scantily clad, gross looking, quote unquote hot women with like breast implants. Oh, and they're like owners in like a porn business too. So there's constantly like, those kinds of women's around. And it's just lots of smoking, cigarettes, lots of, whiskey shots. And the whole time I'm wondering, like, who's paying for all these, by the way? Because I just see y'all pour drinks and walk away. Does anyone whip out a credit card and just say, hey, by the way, like, I'm buying? I always wondered, like, God, but how do you pay for all this? Smoking, drinking, boobies, and every now and then an episode would begin with just like a montage of things happening. And quite often one of them involved one of the characters having sex with somebody. Like, and I'll say this, a whole lot of Charlie Hunnam's ass in this show. More of his ass than I wanted to see, which, by the way, was 0.
Was 0%.
Yeah. And, like, sometimes, like, it'll, like, the show starts and there's just his ass and he's, like, thrusting into a woman. And you're like, whoa!
Whoa!
This show is solid, and I give it points for creating a believable world. And I never once believed that anything that was happening in the show would not go down the way it did. So I give it points for story believability. Mm-hmm. I just didn't really buy into the characters or really latch onto them the way that you would want to and the way that they had intended me to for this kind of show. I didn't really care about Jax or the choices he made because the whole show is about like how he decides maybe I shouldn't be doing this with my life. And as the show goes along, he becomes the president of the motorcycle club, and has like a family. And he's like, do I want my sons to grow up in this kind of world where this is how we treat women, and this is how we treat black people, and this is just how we treat people? Like, do I want them to grow up surrounded by these people? And the whole show is about like, can you fight your nature? Can you go against the way you are? Like, as someone who is a criminal, can Jax actually be a good man, or does him trying to be a good man, is it just inevitable that he'll do bad things? So he's not as bad of a guy as Vic Mackey. He does some bad things, but he's a lot more sympathetic, I think.
I got to say, Hooper, the way that you talk about Sons of Anarchy makes me think it's a little more intellectual than my choice of Flash, where the conflict is, will Barry stop the talking gorilla from robbing the bank?
Yeah, well, maybe it is. I mean, there are philosophical undertones. I mean, like it's not a bad show. I just think that, I guess I'm not sure. It's got good actors and it's got good stuff in it. I just think, especially the first couple of seasons, it's a lot more just of this, how I am, like these carefree, like every now and then, like someone throws like a Molotov cocktail at their bicycle shop. So they had this like, like rock and roll, like kind of like chase to get the guy, and they're shooting at him, running down the street, weaving through traffic. And I'm like, where are the police?
Yeah.
I'm just things like that. And then they catch him and it's like, yeah, we got you. And then they interrogate him or whatever and find out who's behind it. And I'm like, this is stupid. Like, things like that are dumb. What I much more appreciated was, like, the last 2 seasons where, like, people are dying and, like, bad things are happening. So maybe the slow burn helped me appreciate the later seasons, or maybe it's just because when shows end, you can do things with more finality. But I guess I felt like there were 0 stakes for at least half the show. And maybe that's the problem. But in terms of, Jax is likable, and that's cool, but... And like I said, things that happen within the story and within the world are very believable, and they get 100 points for that. I just don't know. I think 7 seasons was too long for this show. I feel like it should have been. It could have been tighter. That's the biggest. And maybe that's the same with The Shield. It just could have been tighter. The Shield had a little less fat to trim than Anarchy does, but.
Well, let me ask you this, and just tell me if this is a fair observation or not. I've never seen Sons of Anarchy, but I felt like towards the beginning, what little bits I had seen, little bits and pieces, it almost seemed a little bit like, here's this thing, and it was almost like we just want the audience to see what life is like for people in a biker gang. And so what you're saying about there being sort of no stakes and that kind of stuff is because maybe to me the way that it came across was it was always like almost like a show and tell. Like, does that make sense? Like, it wasn't necessarily trying to tell a story as much as it was just trying to show us something that we hadn't seen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, and that's probably one of the reasons it even got picked up was just because, there's never been a show about a biker gang. And yeah, they're right. But it needs to be a good show about a biker gang.
Sure.
I'll say this for it, too, because Katie Seagal deserves acclaim. Katie Seagal plays, if you don't know who she is, she was way back on Married with Children. She was Peggy Bundy for 11 years with Ed O'Neill.
And she was romantically involved with Locke on Lost.
That's true. Yeah, she was Helen, and she voices Leela on Futurama.
Leela.
So you know who Katie Seagal is. And she's also married to the showrunner. So she plays like the matriarch of this she is the most complex and interesting character on the show, more so than the lead character, which is both a good and a bad thing. But it's good for her because she does the most questionable things on the show. But she also comes across at times as you always just like when she does them, you're like, what is your problem? And then, but later you're just like, but I get it though. Like you don't see her as like a bad person as much as like a damaged person who doesn't know how to make the right choices.
Right.
And that's good writing. That's good character work. And it's good acting. So she's probably the best part of the show, in my opinion. I don't know. I just thought that she deserved some recognition. So that's Sons of Anarchy. So The Shield and Sons of Anarchy are two solid shows. Yeah. It's not imperative you watch them right now.
Sure.
If you missed them, don't worry about it. If you stopped in the middle, go ahead and finish them. They end in satisfying ways. Okay, and the last thing I got is a little bit quicker. Is another show that finished its run is the Newsroom on HBO. Mm-hmm. This show had 3 seasons. I could have done with a 4th, to be honest. I thought 3 was a little quick, but it didn't overstay its welcome. So maybe it's better. I don't know. So I feel like 3 is a little short. 3 is short for any show. I think 4 is right around where it's like, all right, this is okay. I think 5. I think we decided with Breaking Bad, 5 is the golden number of seasons for a show. 6 was too much for Lost. I think everyone agreed. I've just stated I think that 7's too long for most dramas. So whatever. I mean, what do you mean? Do you think so?
Yeah, I feel like the magic number is a little bit different for every show, but typically for me, any more than 5 seasons, and you're going to have to really explain to me why it's imperative that there's more than 5 seasons.
Why have the characters survived this many deadly encounters or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. It's if it's more than 5 seasons, there better be a darn good reason for it. Because the thing with TV for me is I like to feel as a viewer that the showrunner, that the writers have an ending in mind, that they have a goal that they're trying to get to. And for some reason, maybe 5 is the number where, like, if we're in season 6 or in 7, I start to really, you know what, in 5, I start to wonder where we're headed.
Yeah.
Before that, I can kind of let things go. But in 5, I start saying, okay, you guys have had 5 years. I assume you know what you're doing. And if there's no end in sight, then that doesn't seem like a good sign to me. And I don't know, again, if that was just because I've been burned by other shows in the past or what it is. But 5 to me is sort of the default. But I do think that it's different from show to show. There's no reason for something like Smallville to have 10 years. There's no reason for something like Star Trek to only have 3, or for Firefly to have 14 episodes. I think generally 5 is about the magic number.
I agree. So, I mean, the Newsroom, here's the thing about the Newsroom. I'm going to include my opinion and popular opinion.
Okay.
Here's how I sum up the show in one sentence, or in 3 short ones. The first season was very up its own ass. The second season actually had a plot. and season 3 actually had a heart. That's my succinct, quick summary of the show. This show is written and showrun and created by Aaron Sorkin. So anyone who knows Aaron Sorkin knows that he writes this overlapping, quick, pithy, witty dialogue. But people think, oh, like Joss Whedon. No, not like Joss Whedon.
Right.
Joss Whedon does not load his characters with encyclopedic knowledge of whatever topic they're speaking about. Aaron Sorkin will load people up with more quick facts than you see in like Criminal Minds. It's just like they'll just be talking about blah, 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 blah. Like no one sits there and goes, I actually don't know anything about this subject. Like it's just So the show obviously revolves around a news organization, American ACN, American Cable News, and it's a cable news show. Jeff Daniels stars as Will McAvoy, and he's the anchor. He's the anchor of the show, and it's kind of like a CNN-ish or HLN. It's kind of like it's essentially what if Jeff Daniels had a 1-hour news show on CNN. It's where you it's factual, but it's basically run by his opinions or his spin on it. It kind of like the O'Reilly Factor or something. It's essentially about reinvigorating these people's spirit in just doing the news, like the passion behind doing the news. So I work in the news, so it's interesting to me in that way because it's familiar, but it's also, I don't know, kind of endearing in a way to see people who just want to see people who see news as it used to be seen by everyone in the business, which is as a public service, before it became commercialized and before it became about ratings and what the people wanted to see. But the first season's got really none of that. This is a show that takes place like 2 years behind whatever year you're watching it in. So like the first season, like you don't even realize till halfway through the episode or whenever that, and this show premiered in like 2012, I think. So the first thing that happens in the pilot is the BP oil spill. And so you're like, wait, that was a couple years, and you realize through the course of the season, you're like, oh, well, what I don't like about the first season is that it sets itself 2 years behind, and I feel like it's a chicken shit move because then you're like, oh, I control, but I also get it because you are controlling, what events are going to occur within the season, and you can bend your story around it, and you can either put them on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. But since you know how this story unfolded and concluded, you know all the facts in front of you. You can make them make definitive choices, and us to go, that's the right choice because then later this would happen, and what what I mean? Like you have like a crystal ball, and I didn't like that because I was like, that's kind of like a move, but it was still interesting to watch in terms of just the way it was shot, and the character interactions, and the acting was really good. Season 2, they actually decided, okay, we're gonna have this overrunning arc where they're working on a gigantic investigative report about this that's based on an actual like U.S. operation, but isn't that U.S. operation. And so I thought, I'm impressed that they're not trying to be the first cable network that exposed this about the United States Army. They're instead picking a fictional event that they created for the show, and I thought that's fine. I like that. That's good. And then the third season was really more about the. I'm going to add something in here because this really dovetails nicely. I also recently saw Anchorman 2, which I didn't really, it was kind of funny, whatever. It had its moments. That movie, by the way, is mostly full of, hey, remember this from the first movie? And it's just I didn't like it.
I didn't care for it.
But here's what's good about it. The subtext about what constitutes news is good. Yep. And so I give it points for actually having something to say. So I saw Anchorman 2 and the final season of this show around the same time. And I thought it was interesting that they each had something to say, and it was the same thing, which is basically like, people don't want to hear about this thing or this thing or this thing. They want to hear about who's getting pregnant, and, and we want Twitter followers, and we want this and this and this, and the site is going to be this, and we're going to follow these people. And it's just like, this isn't news. And, and this, obviously the higher ups in the company who grew up, around like Ed Murrow are like, no, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. It's nice to see them actually have a heart to round out the show, where it started as just this kind of soapbox, and then 3 is kind of more like it comes from a really earnest and personal place. And while it does take a very safe stance on modern day news, which is, you know, the one that everyone kind of agrees with.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees with it because that's how the mass population thinks of news. It's why do we have 24-hour news? Why are we rotating the same story? Why are we this and that? And why are we making more out of this issue than it actually is? And it's all about ratings. And I just thought it was interesting that a show, I mean, maybe it's not that interesting. We live in America. We can say whatever the fuck we want. Maybe it's not that interesting, but I like that, you know, that's what it had to say, and that's how it chose to finish out the show. I don't know. So I think The Newsroom is overall worth it because, one, it's short. It's not going to take up much of your time. I mean, the third season is 6 episodes.
Really?
Yeah, the first 2 seasons are maybe 12 or 13. But I mean, that's like 30. That's 30 episodes and change for an entire show that I think is well shot, well written, and well acted, and did not overstay its welcome. So I think of the 3 of the shows I mentioned today, I would recommend The Newsroom the most, just in terms of what I expected from it and how much time I invested, what I got out of it. You know, the show matured in a very short amount of time. So, yeah.
So how many episodes are there overall of the show? There's 10 the first season.
There's 10 the first season. I guess there's 13 or 12 the second season. I mean, it's...
Yeah, that's totally doable.
Yeah. So that's a good show. So if you have HBO or HBO Go or, you know, I'm sure they're available to rent pretty soon or get, you know, from the library or whatever, or just buy it. I'm sure the box set's not even that. I mean, I think it's, I don't know. And
I don't know.
A lot
HBO
of people
charges like crazy for their box sets.
In this show, for whatever reason, recently a scene from the pilot's been floating around the internet lately, which is kind of weird, because people have been posting. There's a scene in the pilot. The pilot opens with Jeff Daniels at like a college Q&A, and there's a liberal pundit to his left, and there's a conservative one to his right, or whatever. Or I didn't pick left and right intentionally. It could be the opposite, but. In fact, I think she's on his right. But he's asked by someone, they're all asked by this girl in the audience, why is America the greatest country in the world, or whatever. So the liberal one's like equality and some other horse shit. And the conservative one's like freedom and freedom. And they ask him, he's like, I don't have an answer. And so Will McAvoy is one of the more interesting characters on television because he's incredibly smart. But he has absolutely 0 ounce of bullshit in him. And that's what's most likable about him. He's a straight shooter. He's cynical, but he's very factually, you know, he's very educated, but he's very real. And so I like watching the show because I enjoy watching him either, you know, build people up or tell people you're full of shit because blah, blah, blah. So, anyway, anyway, his answer when they finally get it out of him is it's not the greatest country in the world, and here's why. And he lists all this stuff, and he just destroys the room. But then he ends it with a real honest, we used to be though, and we used to believe in things, and it can be the greatest country again. Personally, I don't know that I don't believe that America's the greatest country in the world. I understand that sounds elitist, but I enjoyed his speech, and I enjoyed the point of view wasn't stupid. So, anyway, like I said, I've been rattling on about this show, but I think it's because I liked it. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed him as a lead character. And it's unfortunate that this season premiered the same weekend as Dumb and Dumber 2. Jeff Daniels is I think, an incredibly undervalued dramatic actor. And it's not easy to act Sorkin dialogue. Without it being incredibly expository. So, and I guess a quick shout out to Olivia Munn, who's in this show too, who does a really good job as well. All right, well, I guess that's it, you guys. Stay tuned for other episodes in the future. I don't know what we're going to talk about yet.